When will Oklahoma play defense? Do they need to play defense? We will preview the Sooners next on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. All right, we're talking OU football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. Before we dive into it, I want to remind you that you can help us build the channel by grabbing the Amazon link in the description section below. Do your normal Amazon shopping right there. Just use that link. And also, please join our Voice of College Football community. Do you want to talk to me directly? I bring you on. We talk college football face to face, just as we do right here with Jason. Join the Voice of College Football community, and we will do that in addition to an exclusive live stream each and every week in which I respond to your viewer comments. More than 40,000 to date this year. Thank you so much for that kind of response. Jason, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Doing good. Thanks for having me on. It's almost July 4th, about a little bit under a week away. So it means football starting to get cranked up. A lot of more interest as we get through the dog days of summer and get into the fall.
So as I asked off the top, is Oklahoma going to have a defense? Do they need a defense? Do they need a defense in that conference? Do they need a defense considering how good the offense has been? Well, I think the answer is yes, and it's no. It's both. Certainly, they can maintain their elite status if they continue to get this kind of productivity on offense, which remains to be seen with two Heisman Trophy quarterbacks moving on. But at the same time, once they're out of the Big 12, I think they've proven over the last couple of years they can compete, but can they win the crucial games in the college football playoff without a better defense? And again, that remains to be seen.
Right. Yeah, Mark. I mean, I think in terms of your middle question there, it has to improve. Specifically over the last couple of playoff games against Georgia and Alabama, that has come to the forefront where they've been just good enough to win, 4 Big 12 championships. But the playoff games against Alabama and Georgia were very telling in terms of what they need to do to step up to be in the same league as Georgia, in the same league as Clemson, in the same league as Alabama, to be able to compete for national championships. Because it doesn't, the Big 12, it's kind of a catch-22 that Oklahoma's kind of fell into the last few years, where it's certainly a different league than the SEC and even the ACC to that extent, in terms of there's not as much defense being played than the Big 12, obviously, as there is specifically in the SEC. But Oklahoma really has to do a better job of, getting better players in, which I think they've done from the recruiting over the last couple of years. They've made some wholesale changes on the defensive side in terms of their staff. So I think they're making the right steps in terms of being able to compete on a better level defensively. Now, how much of that can be, how much that improvement can happen, this year remains to be seen.
I think there's one distinction with Oklahoma that is different than any other school in the conference, excluding maybe Texas now under Tom Herman over the last couple of years. And that's exactly what we addressed off the top. Their scope, their vision, their goals and objectives are beyond what everybody else is in the conference. Everybody else in the conference, sure, they could talk about competing nationally or competing for national college football playoff positions, but until they actually can win the conference, that's silly to talk about it. So they can play within the conference and say, what do we need to do to win the conference? Oklahoma achieves that year after year after year. So the next step that they've not been able to conquer since going all the way back to 2001 is competing and winning big playoff games and national championship games since then. I think the other distinguishing factor here to be looked at is that for anyone who would make the excuse for Oklahoma that they play in the Big 12, this is the way the game's played, it's impossible to play good defense in the Big 12. Well, I think TCU has debunked that. Iowa State has certainly played some really good defense in recent years since they've risen under Matt Campbell. And also Texas, specifically 2 years, was really good on defense, and certainly was as well last year. So it can be done.
No, it absolutely can be done. And I think there's a lot of sentiments over the last few years that, Oklahoma has wasted two of the best quarterbacks they've seen in obviously the Heisman Trophy winners, but two of the best quarterbacks they've seen in 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 program history with Baker Mayfield, certainly, and then Kyler Murray with his 1 year last year. There's the thought that all of that offensive productivity has been thrown by the wayside. Just if they've had an average defense, I know we'll get into some of the statistics a little bit later, but even if they were in the middle of the road from a overall FBS perspective, I think they're probably maybe not last year. I think Clemson was probably not going to be denied no matter what last year, but maybe the previous year. I think if they have a decent defense, they got off to that 31-14 lead against Georgia, and then kind of lost some steam, obviously there in the third and the fourth quarter. So I think you're probably talking about a potential national champion and 2 years ago. So I don't think that they're they're at the bottom of the rankings in a couple of statistical categories, or close to the bottom at least. So getting over that hump, for a program like Oklahoma, to your point, which their expectations, every year is, to win a Big 12 championship and be in a position to compete for a national championship, or at the very least a playoff spot. So, yeah, there's several theories that have been debunked. To your point, TCU plays really good defense. Texas has played traditionally pretty good defense, and Iowa State, who arguably has some of the least talent in the Big 12, and plays incredible defense for who Iowa State is as a program. So it's certainly doable.
I have difficulty weighing the playoff game against Alabama last year just because of the nature of the game. Was Oklahoma stunned out of the gate, and actually they could play with Alabama? They just got so far behind, but then they scored points, gained yardage. They even made stops on defense. They got back into the game, or a semblance of getting back to the game, or a possession within getting back into the game. Or was Alabama that much better that what we saw in the first quarter was actually the measurement of the two teams, and then Alabama just let off the throttle? I think there can be arguments made on both sides. I think Alabama was decidedly better. Were they remarkably, substantially better than Oklahoma? I don't believe so. I think that they're generally at least last year's editions. Alabama is a 7-14 better team, point better margin team than Oklahoma. The game the year before against Georgia, I think we can gain a lot more from, because it was competitive from the opening snap, that they played with a marginal defense. Again, not a 100th ranked defense, but like a 70th ranked defense. There was actually substantially better performance out of that defense the entire season, and it proved in the playoff game. Even though they gave up yards and points, it actually had to be a fight to score on them, and they showed that they could take it down to the last play of the game. But I think there was also an X factor in Baker Mayfield, and I don't know if they're ever going to replace that guy to that extent. So we could go on and on with the theories about what's happened in the past and what it really meant. But going forward, obviously, they're going to be prolific on offense. But maybe with the offensive line taking a few hits and the quarterback play maybe being good, but not exceptional, that the defense will have to step up to keep this Big 12 streak going, even before we talk about getting to a college football playoff and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I think to your original point, I think it was last year with the game against Alabama. I think it was a little bit of both. I think Oklahoma came in a little shell shocked at not only the physicality that Alabama brought both on the offense and defensive line. So I think once they settled in, they were probably, I would agree with you, 7-14, maybe 17 points better than Oklahoma last year. I think, what was a little bit surprising out of that is how dominating Alabama was on the defensive side early on. Not necessarily because we know Alabama has a great defensive year in year out, but Oklahoma, was scoring points at ease, and then in the first couple 2 or 3 possessions, they completely shut Oklahoma down. So it took a little bit for kind of Oklahoma to get back into the swings. And let's face facts. I think Alabama they took their foot off the gas a little bit in the second half. I think they got a little bored with the game. I think they probably would they have put their foot on the gas the entire game. They could have named the amount of points they wanted to score in that game, and then as I think they scored on every possession in the second half as well. So they they were kind of humming as far as that goes. But yeah, I think it comes down to the fact they just have to play better on defense. They have to play more consistently. They started off pretty well last year, Mark, honestly, in their first couple of games against Florida Atlantic, and then obviously UCLA in the first two games, and then it kind of took a nosedive, but then it progressively got worse throughout the year. But yeah, certainly got to play better. There's opportunity for improvement all the way through all levels of the defense. So that has to be a consistent going into 2019.
With a point spread around 13 or 14 points, Alabama got a little too bored for my liking based on what I was projecting and needing to have happen. And of course, they gave up a touchdown with about 20 seconds left in the game. So those are never good. So, Jason, as we look ahead to 2019, who are some of those players on the Oklahoma defense that give Sooner fans hope that it can be better, will be better?
Yeah, so I think primarily kind of going through the different levels of the defense. If you start kind of on the defensive line, a couple of guys, come to the forefront at the beginning. Ronnie Perkins, who was a freshman last year, true freshman last year, who started about half the games. I think he ended up starting 7 of the 14 overall games. He was really good as a true freshman along the defensive line. Led the team with about 5 sacks, 5.5 sacks, I think it was last year. He's a budding superstar at that defensive line position. Another guy, he plays outside. He's more of a rush end in the 3-4 scheme that Mike Stoops had, and then Alex Grinch is bringing over with him. So there's not a lot of change in terminology, not a lot of change in schemes as far as that goes. Another guy is Neville Gallimore. This is his senior year. He's been injured a lot throughout his career. He was relatively healthy last year. He had his best season in a Sooner uniform, but he has to be more consistent. He has to be more physical at the point of attack, in that 3-4 scheme. And a couple of other people, a couple of younger people that come to mind. Jalen Redmond was a 4-star recruit last year. He had some issues with blood clots, so he wasn't able. He was going to be counted on to help out right away. He had some blood clots that they identified in the summer, late in the summer, early fall. So he was held out a large majority of the year. He tried to come back. He played sparingly in a few games, but then the blood clots came back, so they effectively shut him down. So he was able to a redshirt last year. So he was healthy in the spring, looked good in the spring. So all signs indicate to him being able to help immediately. And then there's three more guys that are brand new that are coming in that are going to be asked to help immediately, and that's not just on the defensive line. That's kind of across the board. So there's 2 Marcuses, Marcus Hicks and Marcus Stripling and Marcus Hicks. Marcus Stripling is more of a defensive end type. He'll be asked, and he'll have every opportunity to play right away. And then Marcus Hicks, very unheralded. And I say unheralded. He was a 4-star. He's out of Wichita. A lot of times those recruiting services, the rankings kind of go as far as how well you play at the specific camps. And he didn't go to a lot of the high profile camps, yet he was still able to get that 4-star ranking. So it's the rankings are what they are. Kind of depends on what you do once you obviously get into the fall, into the spring. So both of those folks will be here in the fall. Interesting to see how if Hicks is able to push Gallimore, and there's a couple other, Marcus Overton, Dylan Falmatu on the defensive line, push them for some time. He was a high school wrestler. Typically he wrestled about 20 to 30 pounds below. He was wrestling against 20 to 30 pounds guys that were a lot heavier than him, and he was a high school All-American from a wrestling perspective as well. So that typically is a lot of people do that, play football and wrestle. That's helpful both on the defense and the offensive line. So I think that infusion of talent on the defensive line perspective will certainly help, and those will be counted on. As we move over to the linebacker position, a couple constants at the linebacker position, specifically last year was Kenneth Murray. Kenneth Murray, a couple years ago, he was forced into action as a true freshman. Wasn't really ready. He was, during the Rose Bowl game against Georgia, they they game planned against him. Simple as that. Kirby Smart and team, that they knew what they had in him. They knew they had a lot of inexperience, so they did a lot of misdirection, and he was lost for a large majority of the game. So he learned last year. He was a lot better. He had over 150 tackles last year, I believe 155 exactly. But where he has struggled historically, Mark, is he gets at the middle linebacker position. He struggles a little bit at the point of attack. He gets lost in some of the trash up the middle from time to time. So there were some thoughts last year in the spring and certainly in the fall camp that they might move him outside, just to take a little bit advantage of his speed and not rely on him to make the defensive calls and really just let him read and react more than kind of think about that. That certainly didn't come to fruition. And I think there's a lot of signs that point to that actually happening this year. Alex Grinch's his defense is predicated more on speed than anything. He's coined the speed D term from, when he was in Washington State, and then obviously the 1 year at Ohio State last year. So he's really about getting the best, getting the fastest 11 people on the field. So I think in order to do that, they would like to move him outside. Now, with moving him outside, they have a couple of folks that will challenge for kind of that middle linebacker position. The two folks that really come to mind, Brian Mead was really good in the in the spring. He was a standout in the spring game, played really well. Him along. I'm sorry, him along with Levi Draper are two folks that should be able to challenge in the middle. And I think if Grinch and the defensive staff feel confident, they would love to be in a position to move Kenneth Murray outside if they feel like they can get someone that can produce in the middle. So, I think that will be a good position battle to watch for Oklahoma in the fall. Was if they can get someone to emerge there at that middle linebacker position. One big impact that they got in the spring that was really unfortunate is Caleb Kelly, who came on towards the end of last year, was pretty good in the in the West Virginia game. Had a scoop and score there. And then obviously he played well against Texas in the Big 12 championship game. He had he had an ACL injury in the spring, early spring. It was kind of more in the winter time frame. So that was that'll be a big setback. There's some talk that he might be ready come fall, come late, kind of late through fall practice, and might be ready for the beginning of the year. But ACLs are pretty hard to get through in that short amount of time. So I think it was around the January February time frame where he had that injury. So he might be in a position where he's able to come back. If he's able to come back, he'll certainly be an instant starter next year, or this year for Oklahoma. So and I think lastly, Mark, where the rubber meets the road is the secondary. The secondary was just abysmal, pretty much all year. We talked about, me and you had talked about the how they stepped up a little bit in the got some turnovers in that West Virginia game, but aside from the turnovers, they were still incredibly bad, in pass coverage. And they were 129th out of 129 teams in terms of yards allowed from a passing perspective. Now, I mean, we both agree we don't put a ton of credence in yards. We're more focused on points, but I think they're 95th in the country in points allowed last year. So a couple of Trey Brown is kind of their best player from a secondary position. You know, he had the big play against Texas and the blitz and the sack of Sam Ellinger in the end zone that helped kind of kickstart that last part of the year. So he's very much solidified as one of the starting cornerbacks. Now there'll be probably a battle for the other cornerback position. Parnell Motley has a 2-year starter. He's been very, very inconsistent. There's times where he's he's played really well. He's made good plays on the ball. He does have good ball skills. I think he's a confidence guy. Whereas I think cornerbacks are they're out there on an island. I think they have to have that mentality. But he's one of those guys who in the past, if he's playing well, if he covers well, if he gets a couple of deflections, if he gets an interception, his confidence soars and he plays pretty well. Now, if you get a couple of passes on him, get some touchdowns on him, his confidence goes down and he kind of goes in the tank. So one of the things that he would probably need to improve on here in 2019 is making better plays on the ball. And it's not just him. I think it's the secondary. There was a lot of times where they were in decent position, but they just didn't make the plays on the ball when they needed to. One of the big so he'll be there. Another true freshman, Woody Washington, that will come in. He'll probably be able to battle him for that starting position. He was another 4-star guy. Oklahoma actually had 7 different 4-star recruits in this 2019 class on the defensive side, and most of those guys will be counted on to at least provide depth this year, if not challenge. There's another individual named Jaden Davis who came in the spring. Jamal Murray came in the spring as well. A couple of those guys should be in a position to challenge for starting spots. And then, really, Mark, finally, from a safety perspective, Brendan Radley-Hiles was a heralded recruit, 5-star guy last year out of California. Did not live up to the expectations. He was, granted, he did play out of position a little bit. He played more, at a safety position where they'll probably look to move him more to the nickelback this year, in that base defense that Oklahoma runs. So he was really a disappointment just in Sooner fans, just in general, coming in from a big program, big high school program, being a 5-star guy, and not living up to the expectations. One guy to keep in mind as from a Sooners perspective as you look into 2019 from a safety position perspective is Jeremiah Cradell from Mater Dei. So he came in big. He was probably, honestly, the biggest get for Oklahoma, especially in the sign and later in that early signing period this year. There was a video that the official Twitter page released where Riley and Cale Gundy and a couple of other ones, when he announced live on ESPN, I believe he did during the early signing period process, where they were kind of jumping up and down, running through the hall, celebrating. So they realized the need that they have at not only that position but overall in the defensive position. So he's a guy that they'll look to. I would, based on some of the things some of the feedback that I've been hearing, some early on in summer, and some of the things, he's about as college ready, FBS ready as anybody that they have on the team. I would be surprised if he's not starting immediately, at least by conference season.
All right, we got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football, breaking down Oklahoma's defense. And you mentioned most recently Cradell, 15th rated safety according to the 247 composite. A few other guys that you mentioned and others that were just signed in the 2019 class. Stripling, the 16th rated strong side defensive end out of Houston. Joseph Wete, a strong side defensive end. I hope I pronounced his last name correctly. Right. Wete. With a accent there. So I got that right, Jason?
Yes, sir, you did.
Okay.
Good job.
Okay. 11th rated strong side defensive end out of Washington, D.C., coming all the way near cross country, and Woody Washington, number 22 rated cornerback out of Tennessee. So possible reinforcements there. And Jason highlighting the guys that most likely will need to contribute as freshmen this year. Some other things that caught my eye, obviously, you mentioned Caleb Kelly and the uncertainty of his health status. Fourth on the team in tackles last year was 61, multiple sacks and tackles for loss in the backfield. He's obviously going to be missed if he can't make it back at full strength. And of course, Curtis Bolton, one of the more reliable tacklers in the Big 12, racked up 142 stops total last year. He moves on. So obviously senior leadership and productivity missed there. It's a secondary in particular. Obviously, there can be interceptions from the linebacking core in particular and a defensive end once in a while. But you look at the secondary for a team that gave up 35 pass attempts per game. And also keep in mind that they didn't play a good offense non-conference. So they played FAU out of the gate. Obviously, that's a different level of football, and they completely annihilated them. UCLA was bad. They had quarterback issues. Army just doesn't throw the ball. So even taking those 3 games out of the 14-game comparison and breakdown, they're giving up 35 pass attempts per game and only get 6 interceptions. So I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about in regards to making plays in the secondary. And interceptions can be an overrated statistic because there's a little bit of luck involved at times and opportunity. But at the same time, good defenses get turnovers. 6 interceptions on that many pass attempts, and 3 came from Motley, as you mentioned, and he was hot and cold. He had 11 passes defense. So when he was in that groove that you talked about, he's breaking up plays and making picks, but gave up big plays as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the big indicators from a turnover perspective. You mentioned the 6 interceptions, only 11 turnovers that they forced in 2019, and that's something that has to get better. The defense isn't going to get better overnight, and I think there's some things that they need to do that will help that. Some things that Alex Grinch preaches that he's predicated his defense on is getting to the quarterback, getting sacks, and then also forcing turnovers. I think he's when he initially kind of got started a couple of years ago before that, but he reiterated it when he was brought in. He had kind of done an independent study on himself. He believes that forcing 24 turnovers on the defensive side of the ball equates to 9 wins. So I think he's been very successful for that with that. At Washington State, he did have a little bit of a rough year last year at Ohio State, but that he was kind of in a co-defensive coordinator role there, where it was a little different than I guess that he's been been used to in the past. But I think his defense at Washington State progressively got better in terms of forcing turnovers. I think his last year there, they were probably I think they were top 15, top 20 overall from a defensive perspective, and they forced between 32, 34 turnovers that year. So I think that's what he's going to bring to the table. And to your point, Mark, that's what's needed. In the Big 12, you're not going to the days of holding teams to 17, 20 points, that's not realistic. By and large, when you're talking about the Texases and the West Virginias, the TCUs, and of the world, Iowa States, teams like that, you're not going to hold teams like that down. That's why turnovers are so critical to get more of those, to get your defense off the field.
Jason Ray, last word on college football, breaking down Oklahoma's defense for us. Jason, we appreciate you stopping by.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.